The refusal arrived quietly, just 12 carefully worded lines delivered through private channels hours before the guest list was finalized. But inside royal circles, Princess Beatrice's decision to decline the invitation was treated less like a scheduling issue and more like a warning shot, because those familiar with palace protocol understood immediately. Senior royals do not casually absent themselves from events tied to the crown's inner machinery. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, the explanation appeared harmless enough. According to palace-adjacent reports, the princess had cited a prior scheduling conflict, the kind of carefully sanitized phrase royal households have relied upon for generations whenever uncomfortable truths need to remain buried beneath layers of etiquette. But almost immediately, the wording itself began attracting attention, not because it sounded dramatic, but because it sounded too precise, too controlled. And in the strange ecosystem surrounding the House of Windsor, where every appearance is negotiated months in advance and every absence is quiet. Catalogued by courtiers, even a minor withdrawal can send ripples through the institution. The gathering itself was never intended to become public controversy. Various interpretations of the evening describe it as a high-level royal-adjacent function attended by aristocratic allies, longtime institutional donors, and figures closely connected to the crown's modern support structure. It was the sort of event designed not for headlines, but for influence. The sort of private evening where relationships are reinforced behind closed doors while the monarchy carefully maintains the invisible architecture that keeps the firm stable during increasingly fragile times. Yet insiders whisper that Beatrice's absence transformed the atmosphere before guests had even arrived, because what startled palace observers was not simply that she declined, but when she declined. Reports suggest the refusal came dangerously late, allegedly after seating arrangements had already been finalized and security protocols quietly adjusted around the expected attendance of certain senior figures. Those familiar with royal administrative customs insist this kind of last-minute withdrawal is deeply unusual for so. Raised within the rigid discipline of royal scheduling, and almost immediately, aides reportedly moved into containment mode. According to several royal correspondents, senior palace staff spent much of the following morning attempting to downplay speculation before it could spiral into something more damaging. Certain newspapers were allegedly encouraged to frame the situation as entirely routine, while other commentators were quietly reminded that Princess Beatrice has long balanced royal obligations with private family responsibilities. But despite those efforts, the questions refused to disappear. In fact, they multiplied. Who exactly extended the invitation? Why had the decline reportedly unsettled multiple palace offices at once? And perhaps most importantly, why had royal insiders already been whispering for weeks about growing distance between Beatrice and certain influential factions orbiting the crown? That last detail began surfacing with increasing frequency as royal correspondents started comparing the incident to earlier moments during King Charles's reign, where strategic social exclusions carried meanings far beyond the surface. Different interpretations of emerged. Lace behavior during the past 2 years have repeatedly pointed toward a monarchy becoming more cautious, more selective, and far more aware of reputational risk than at any point in recent memory. Since early 2024, with King Charles navigating both constitutional pressure and personal health struggles, the institution has reportedly become obsessed with discipline, loyalty, and predictability. And suddenly, Beatrice's absence no longer looked socially accidental. Some insiders even noted subtle shifts that, in hindsight, appeared increasingly significant. Fewer visible interactions with certain royal associates, more carefully controlled public appearances, an unmistakable restraint in how Beatrice positioned herself around contentious figures tied to previous controversies surrounding the wider royal family. None of it dramatic enough to generate headlines on its own. But taken together, the pattern became harder to ignore. Royal historians often point out that within aristocratic systems, silence itself becomes a form of communication. Invitations matter. Seating plans matter. Attendance matters even more. And when a princess quietly removes herself from a gathering tied closely, monarchy's social bloodstream, the absence can become louder than attendance ever would have been, especially during a reign already defined by internal caution. Because behind the polished language and controlled smiles, The modern monarchy now operates in an atmosphere shaped by survival. Every alliance is scrutinized. Every association carries consequences. Every appearance risks creating headlines the palace can no longer afford. And for Princess Beatrice, a royal figure long forced to navigate the complicated shadow of both loyalty and legacy, that balancing act may finally have reached a far more uncomfortable stage than the public realizes. But behind the polite refusal lay a far more delicate issue, one connected not to calendars, but to loyalty. For months, subtle changes around Princess Beatrice had gone largely unnoticed. Fewer appearances, altered seating arrangements, carefully managed photographs. Yet according to royal watchers, the decline merely exposed a fracture that had already been widening quietly behind palace walls. In the years following Queen Elizabeth II's passing, the entire gravitational structure of the monarchy began shifting beneath the feet of lesser-positioned royals. The old system, carefully maintained through decades of ritual, hierarchy, and invisible understanding, suddenly entered a period of ruthless recalibration. King Charles's reign, shaped by both personal vulnerability and institutional urgency, increasingly focused on a slimmer, more concentrated monarchy. And while the public mostly interpreted that strategy as modernization, insiders whisper that behind the scenes it created an atmosphere of silent anxiety among those existing at the edges of royal power. Princess Beatrice found herself trapped precisely within that uncertainty. For years she had occupied an unusual space inside the House of Windsor. Close enough to the crown to remain recognizable across the world, yet distant enough from formal duties to avoid the relentless machinery surrounding senior working royals. But after the death of the late queen, that balance reportedly became far harder to maintain. Because under Charles, proximity to the institution no longer guaranteed comfort. Every public appearance, every association, every social connection suddenly carried deeper implications. And according to several palace commentators, Beatrice and others did. Reports suggest that beginning in early 2024, subtle but unmistakable adjustments started emerging around her public positioning. Royal correspondents noted fewer appearances alongside controversial figures tied to ongoing institutional headaches. Certain social invitations reportedly became more selective. Media coverage surrounding Beatrice also appeared to shift in tone, portraying her less as a peripheral York family figure and more as a composed, disciplined extension of the monarchy's stable future. It was, as one royal insider allegedly described it, a careful image recalibration. That phrase would begin surfacing repeatedly among palace-adjacent media streams over the following months. Not dramatic enough to trigger official headlines, but persistent enough to attract attention among those who study royal behavior professionally. Different interpretations of this recalibration suggest Beatrice had become increasingly aware of the monarchy's growing intolerance for unpredictable optics, especially during a period when Prince William's influence inside palace operations appeared to be steadily expanding. And that may have changed because insiders whisper that William's camp has spent the past 2 years quietly consolidating a future-facing royal structure built around discipline, loyalty, and controlled public perception. The institution, already exhausted by years of scandal, memoirs, interviews, and public fractures, reportedly began rewarding figures seen as stable while gradually distancing itself from personalities capable of reigniting controversy. Within that environment, Beatrice allegedly emerged as someone attempting to navigate survival with extreme caution. That balancing act became even more complicated because of the York family's uniquely fragile standing inside the monarchy. The shadow surrounding Prince Andrew never truly disappeared. No matter how carefully public appearances were managed, no matter how restrained Beatrice and Eugenie remained, the institutional damage lingered beneath the surface. Palace insiders reportedly understood this reality with brutal clarity. The daughters themselves were not accused of wrongdoing, yet they remained permanently linked to one of the most difficult chapters the modern monarchy has faced in decades. And according to royal watchers, Beatrice increasingly appeared determined not to allow that burden to consume her future role entirely. Some reports even suggest she had begun aligning herself more closely with figures associated with Prince William's vision for the monarchy's next era, not openly, never dramatically, but through careful appearances, selective attendance, and an almost surgical awareness of optics. Those familiar with palace dynamics claim this quiet repositioning reflected growing concern about being pulled into internal conflicts capable of permanently damaging her standing within the institution. Because inside the modern monarchy, neutrality itself has become dangerous. Every friendship is scrutinized, every dinner invitation analyzed, every photograph dissected for hidden meaning. And as the royal household grows more protective of its fragile public image, even small personal decisions begin carrying institutional consequences far larger than they appear on the surface. Which is precisely why Beatrice's refusal triggered such immediate unease. Not because she declined an invitation, but because many insiders suspected the decision represented something much deeper, a princess quietly signaling where, when she could no longer afford to stand, and nowhere was that tension more visible than in the guest list itself. The names attached to the evening transformed a routine social engagement into something infinitely more sensitive. Because this was not merely a dinner, it was a gathering tied to influence, alliances, and the fragile architecture of royal favor. By the time whispers surrounding the guest list began circulating through royal media circles, Princess Beatrice's absence had already taken on a completely different meaning. What initially appeared to be a polite withdrawal was now being interpreted by some palace commentators as something far more calculated. Because according to insiders familiar with the monarchy's deeply coded social structure, gatherings like these are never simply social. They are signals. Carefully orchestrated displays of proximity, trust, and institutional standing. And in periods of royal instability, those signals become even more dangerous. Reports suggest the event brought together a complicated mixture of aristocratic figures. Longtime royal associates, media-connected personalities, and individuals believed to orbit rival factions within the broad, Maya royal ecosystem. Some names reportedly carried reputational baggage the palace has spent years trying to contain. Others were viewed as politically delicate due to their perceived loyalties inside the increasingly fragile balance of King Charles's reign. And while none of this was officially acknowledged, the anxiety surrounding attendance allegedly became impossible to ignore. Because beneath the polished etiquette of royal society lies a brutal reality few outsiders fully understand. Proximity equals power. Those invited into these private spaces are often seen as socially endorsed by the institution itself. Who sits beside whom? Who arrives together? Who lingers in conversation after formal proceedings conclude? Every interaction becomes material for interpretation. Every photograph becomes a potential headline. And according to various palace observers, that is precisely why Beatrice's refusal triggered so much unease behind the scenes. Some insiders reportedly viewed the decision as deliberate positioning. Not rebellion, not confrontation, something quieter, far more strategic. Royal historians have long pointed to similar moments throughout modern royal history where social maneuvering replaced open conflict. During the later years of Queen Elizabeth II's reign, invitations themselves often became instruments of discipline. Certain figures would quietly disappear from guest lists, while others were subtly elevated through carefully managed proximity to senior royals. Nothing was ever announced publicly. The monarchy rarely humiliates through spectacle. Instead, it operates through silence, distance, and invisible recalibration. And many commentators now believe the current reign is adopting those same tactics with even greater intensity. Since early 2024, palace insiders have repeatedly referenced a growing obsession with optics management inside royal operations. The term surfaces constantly in conversations surrounding Prince William's expanding influence and the institution's determination to avoid another era of uncontrolled controversy. Following years of scandals, public betrayals, and damaging media cycles, the monarchy reportedly entered survival mode. The result has been a quieter but far more disciplined system where appearances are measured almost militarily. Within that atmosphere, private loyalty and public neutrality no longer coexist. That contradiction may explain why Beatrice's situation appears so emotionally complex. Because despite her efforts to maintain careful distance from controversy, she remains bound by blood to one of the monarchy's most difficult modern legacies. At the same time, reports suggest she has worked diligently to preserve positive relationships within William's increasingly influential circle. Balancing those realities was always going to become difficult eventually, but now, according to palace watchers, it may be becoming impossible. And then there is Princess Eugenie. Unlike Beatrice, Eugenie's relationships within royal circles have often been viewed as more fluid, more socially expansive, and in some interpretations, more unpredictable. Various reports over recent years have linked her to differing friendships and alliances across the royal spectrum, occasionally placing the sisters in subtly different institutional positions. Nothing openly hostile, nothing dramatic. Yet insiders whisper that their approaches to navigating royal survival may no longer entirely align. That possibility only intensified speculation surrounding the dinner, because suddenly the public was no longer asking why Beatrice stayed away. They were asking what attendance itself might have implied, what alliances might have been inferred, what narratives could have emerged if certain individuals had appeared together under the same roof during one of the monarchy's most sensitive periods in decades. And according to insiders, the real concern was not who attended, it was who might be photographed together. As King Charles continues navigating the physical demands of monarchy, a quieter transition has reportedly been unfolding behind the scenes. And at the center of it stands Prince William, carefully reshaping the future architecture of the crown. For much of the public, the monarchy still appears anchored in the reign of King Charles III. The ceremonies continue. The constitutional rituals remain intact. The language of continuity is preserved with deliberate precision. But according to palace insiders, a second reality has been steadily emerging beneath the surface, one in which Prince William's influence over the institution has expanded far beyond what most people fully recognize. Not through dramatic announcements or visible power struggles, but through something colder and maybe far more effective: gradual operational control. Reports suggest that since early 2024, as concerns surrounding the king's health intensified, William's inner circle began assuming greater responsibility over the monarchy's long-term image management. Different interpretations of palace restructuring describe a future-focused strategy designed to protect the crown from further instability after years of public scandal, internal fractures, and relentless media warfare. The goal, according to those familiar with royal operations, was not simply modernization. It was survival, and survival required discipline. That philosophy reportedly gave rise to what some royal commentators have privately labeled an informal heirs accord, a tightening network of trusted figures expected to embody discretion, stability, and institutional loyalty above personal emotion. It was never official. No document exists. No announcement was made. Yet insiders whisper that a clear distinction gradually emerged between those considered dependable and those viewed as reputational liabilities. Within that shifting structure, Princess Beatrice allegedly began earning quiet trust, not because she sought power or quite the opposite. Palace sources suggest her value came precisely from her restraint. Unlike other royal figures whose public relationships often generated unpredictable headlines, Beatrice increasingly cultivated an image of careful neutrality. She rarely courted controversy, rarely inserted herself into public disputes, and perhaps most importantly, she appeared to understand the monarchy's growing obsession with controlled optics during one of the most fragile periods in recent royal history. That discretion did not go unnoticed. Reports indicate William's camp has become increasingly selective about the social and institutional company surrounding the future monarchy. Every association now carries potential consequences. Every photograph can trigger days of speculation. Every public interaction risks reopening old wounds the palace has spent years trying to contain. And according to royal insiders, stricter expectations surrounding proximity and appearances have quietly become the norm rather than the exception. At the center of that operational discipline reportedly stands Catherine. While Prince William increasingly shapes the monarchy's strategic direction, Princess Catherine is often described by commentators as the stabilizing force preserving its emotional credibility. Insiders frequently portray her as deeply committed to institutional order, consistency, and restraint. In many ways, she represents the exact opposite of chaos, the exact opposite of unpredictability. And during a period when the monarchy has faced repeated crises from both inside and outside palace walls, that steadiness has allegedly become one of the institution's most valuable assets, which may explain why loyalty inside royal circles is now measured differently than before. The old monarchy often tolerated difficult personalities so long as public duty remained intact. But the modern institution appears increasingly intolerant of ambiguity itself. Figures connected even indirectly to controversy reportedly face heightened scrutiny, particularly when public trust in the crown feels increasingly fragile. This has created enormous emotional pressure for royals positioned between family loyalty and institutional expectation. Few understand that burden more painfully than Beatrice, because while she reportedly seeks alignment with the monarchy's future stability, she also remains emotionally tied to a family network carrying deep institutional scars. The tension is relentless. Protect the family or protect survival within the firm. Remain loyal to personal relationships or adapt to the colder realities shaping William's future reign. According to palace observers, that balancing act has become nearly impossible to sustain without eventually making difficult choices. And perhaps that is why her refusal carried such extraordinary weight inside royal circles. Because by this stage, the issue was no longer simply about attending a private gathering. It was about what attendance might signal within an institution now obsessed with discipline, caution, and long-term preservation. Every decision had become part of a larger calculation. Every social interaction quietly examined through the lens of future consequences, which made the invitation itself feel less like a social courtesy and more like a test. Officially, there was no drama, no feud, no confrontation, just an unfortunate clash of commitments. Yet within hours, palace-adjacent media streams were already dissecting the wording of the statement with forensic precision. That is the strange reality of a monarchy. The less the palace says, the louder the silence becomes. According to various royal correspondents, the phrasing surrounding Princess Beatrice's refusal immediately attracted attention because of how carefully controlled it appeared. Every sentence seemed polished to eliminate emotional interpretation. There was no warmth, no regret beyond the formal minimum, no indication that alternative arrangements had been explored, simply a prior commitment and an inability to attend. To ordinary audiences, the wording sounded harmless, routine even, but within royal circles, where language has operated as a coded institutional shield for generations, the smallest phrase can carry enormous significance. And palace insiders know that better than anyone. Royal experts quickly began appearing across media discussions analyzing what they described as classic containment language. Some pointed to historical moments during previous reigns when vague scheduling conflicts quietly masked deeper fractures inside the House of Windsor. Others referenced the monarchy's long-standing preference for indirect communication during periods of internal discomfort. Because the crown rarely acknowledges ineptity edges tension directly. It absorbs it, buries it beneath procedure, etiquette, and strategically neutral wording until the public loses interest or until the truth becomes impossible to contain. But this time, interest only intensified. Part of that fascination stems from the public's growing awareness that the monarchy now communicates as much through absence as presence. Over the past several years, royal watchers have become increasingly fluent in the institution's nonverbal language. They study seating plans, facial expressions, balcony appearances, funeral positioning, arrival orders, who travels together, who does not. In an institution built upon symbolism, silence itself has become a form of narrative control, and Beatrice's silence felt unusually deliberate. Social media speculation exploded almost immediately despite the palace's refusal to elaborate further. Some commentators dismissed the situation entirely, insisting the public was manufacturing drama from nothing. But others argued the intensity of the reaction reflected something deeper, a growing perception that every royal interaction now exists within a larger atmosphere of institutional fragility. Since the turbulence, of recent years, audiences no longer interpret these moments as isolated social events. They view them as clues. That shift has fundamentally changed how the monarchy is consumed. Insiders whisper that palace aides have become increasingly frustrated by the public's obsession with decoding royal behavior. Yet ironically, the institution itself helped create that environment through decades of carefully managed symbolism. The monarchy survives on mystique, restraint, and controlled ambiguity. But in the digital age, ambiguity no longer calms speculation. It fuels it. Every vague statement becomes material for endless analysis. And in Beatrice's case, one particular phrase triggered extraordinary attention: prior scheduling conflict. Royal historians noted how frequently similar wording has surfaced during periods of aristocratic discomfort throughout British royal history. Different interpretations of past royal absences often revealed hidden tensions only years later, after memoirs, biographies, or palace leaks finally emerged. Because historically, the monarchy's most important conflicts rarely begin with open warfare. They begin quietly. A missed dinner, a declined invitation, a seating adjustment, a carefully managed distance impossible to explain publicly without risking greater damage. That is why some insiders reportedly began describing Beatrice's refusal as a strategic absence. Not necessarily hostile, not openly defiant, but intentional. The theory gained traction because the palace itself appeared determined to shut the conversation down unusually quickly. Requests for clarification reportedly received no additional comment. Palace-adjacent offices maintained strict silence. And according to several media observers, that restraint only deepened public curiosity. Because in royal culture, over-explaining is dangerous, but saying nothing at all can sometimes become even more revealing, especially during a reign already overshadowed by uncertainty, restructuring, and invisible internal pressure. As speculation continued building, one uncomfortable reality became harder to ignore. The monarchy was no longer simply managing appearances, it was managing perceptions of stability itself. And every public absence now carried the potential to destabilize that carefully maintained illusion far more than previous generations ever faced. Still, the fall, a single absence would soon ripple far beyond one evening event. For Princess Beatrice, the challenge has always been uniquely painful. How to preserve personal loyalty while surviving the consequences of a family legacy she never created. That contradiction has followed her for years like an invisible shadow trailing just behind every public appearance, every carefully measured statement, every restrained smile offered during royal engagements. Because while the public often views monarchy through the lens of privilege and ceremony, those born into its more complicated branches inherit something far heavier than titles. They inherit consequences. And for Beatrice, few burdens have proven more relentless than the institutional damage left behind by the controversies surrounding Prince Andrew. The tragedy, according to royal commentators, is that she never controlled any of it. Yet inside the monarchy, innocence and association rarely exist separately. Since the height of the Andrew scandals, the York family has occupied an increasingly delicate position within the House of Windsor. Never fully exiled, never fully restored, instead suspended in an uncomfortable space between. ICN emerged bloodline and reputational risk. Palace insiders reportedly understood early on that the fallout would not remain confined to one individual alone. It would inevitably shape perceptions surrounding the entire York branch for years to come. And according to those familiar with internal royal tensions, Beatrice became painfully aware of that reality long before the public fully grasped it. That awareness appears to have shaped almost every aspect of her public evolution. Over recent years, reports suggest Beatrice worked carefully to project dignity, discretion, and emotional restraint. While other royal controversies erupted into interviews, accusations, memoirs, and public spectacle, she largely remained silent. Not passive, silent. There is a difference. Royal watchers often describe her approach as deeply controlled, almost cautious to the point of emotional exhaustion. Because every appearance reportedly carried invisible calculations beneath the surface. Every social interaction risked reopening institutional wounds she had spent years trying to outgrow. And still, the pressure never truly disappeared. According to palace observers, Beatrice has increasingly been framed as a mile figure caught between worlds. On one side stands personal loyalty, the deeply human instinct to protect family regardless of circumstance. On the other stands the cold machinery of monarchy, where survival often depends upon distance, perception, and sacrifice. Navigating those realities simultaneously is not merely difficult. It can become emotionally suffocating, especially for second-generation royals who inherit public scrutiny without inheriting direct institutional power. That burden has become one of the defining tensions inside the modern monarchy. The children of controversial figures are expected to preserve dignity while quietly absorbing reputational damage they did not create. They must remain composed while their identities become permanently linked to scandals beyond their control. And unlike senior royals protected by constitutional necessity, figures like Beatrice exist in a far more vulnerable space, visible enough to attract scrutiny, but not central enough to guarantee protection. That uncertainty changes people. Insiders whisper that much of Beatrice's recent behavior reflects a woman trying desperately to protect both her family and her future within and on. Naples, institution becoming less emotionally forgiving by the year, the balancing act is brutal. Defend loved ones too openly and risk institutional isolation. Distance yourself too aggressively, and accusations of betrayal begin to emerge. There is no clean victory inside that equation, only survival. And survival inside the monarchy often comes at a deeply personal cost. Royal commentators have increasingly noted the contrast between Beatrice's composed public image and the enormous private pressure likely surrounding her position. Because behind palace gates, relationships do not unfold in ordinary ways. Family disagreements become constitutional concerns. Social appearances become strategic calculations. Emotional loyalty collides constantly with institutional necessity. Few environments force individuals to compartmentalize themselves so completely. That may explain why the invitation controversy resonated so intensely with audiences. On the surface, it involved a declined event, but underneath, many people recognized something far more human. The quiet struggle of someone attempting to navigate impossible expectations without detonating the fragile balance surrounding her life. And now, according to those familiar with palace dynamics, survival has become the defining obsession of the modern monarchy itself. The modern monarchy no longer wages war through public declarations. It operates through distance, through silence, through invitations quietly declined and appearances carefully avoided. That transformation may be one of the most important yet least understood shifts inside the House of Windsor over the past decade. The monarchy once survived crises through spectacle formal statements, televised addresses, carefully staged reconciliations designed to project unity no matter how fractured reality had become behind palace walls. But according to royal historians, the institution eventually learned that public confrontation often creates more damage than resolution. Every denial feeds headlines. Every visible dispute invites deeper scrutiny. And after years of scandals, interviews, memoirs, and institutional instability, the Crown reportedly adopted a colder strategy altogether. Now, it manages conflict through absence. The method is subtle, ruthlessly subtle. Instead of dramatic expulsions or explosive public feuds, modern royal operations increasingly rely on what insiders have privately described as bureaucratic warfare. Invitations become selective, access quietly narrows, shared appearances gradually disappear, seating arrangements shift, communications become more formal, more distant, more controlled. On the surface, nothing appears openly hostile. Yet within palace culture, those small adjustments can completely redefine a royal figure standing inside the institution. And according to various commentators, that strategy has accelerated dramatically under the emerging influence of Prince William's future court. Reports suggest William's approach to monarchy is heavily shaped by discipline, predictability, and institutional containment. After witnessing years of public turmoil surrounding the royal family, insiders claim he has become deeply focused on protecting the crown from unnecessary volatility. The emphasis is no longer simply on popularity. It is on control, stability, risk reduction. Every public interaction is increasingly measured against one brutal question: does this strengthen the monarchy or destabilize it? That mentality changes how relationships function inside royal life, because once survival becomes the the institution's primary objective, emotional considerations inevitably begin losing ground to strategic calculations. The monarchy has always demanded sacrifice, but palace observers argue the modern era has made that sacrifice colder than before. Personal loyalty matters less if it threatens institutional credibility. Affection matters less if it creates reputational unpredictability. And slowly, almost invisibly, controlled distancing becomes normalized as a survival mechanism. Princess Beatrice's absence fits precisely within that atmosphere. According to royal insiders, the controversy surrounding her refusal was never truly about one dinner invitation alone. It reflected something much larger: the monarchy's growing reliance on symbolic separation as a form of internal management. Because in royal systems, absence can communicate far more powerfully than attendance ever could. Declining to appear beside certain figures sends signals without requiring explanations. It creates distance without open hostility. Most importantly, it preserves plausible deniability while still allowing institutional lines to be quietly redrawn. Royal historians often compare this approach to earlier reign. Silence functioned as one of the crown's most effective weapons. During moments of tension throughout the 20th century, difficult figures were rarely confronted publicly at first. Instead, proximity itself gradually disappeared. Invitations stopped arriving. Shared appearances became increasingly rare. Public warmth cooled almost imperceptibly until the institutional message became impossible to ignore. And today's monarchy appears to be refining that strategy for the digital age. The difference now is speed. Social media magnifies every absence instantly. Audiences analyze interactions in real time. Royal watchers track body language, guest lists, travel arrangements, and even minor social decisions with forensic obsession. As a result, palace officials reportedly understand that modern optics management requires extraordinary precision. One photograph can dominate international headlines for days. One uncomfortable association can reignite years of controversy the institution believed safely buried. That pressure has made the monarchy more cautious than ever before. According to those familiar with palace operations, protecting institutional stability now outweighs nearly every personal consideration. The Crown's priority is continuity, predictability, preservation, and within that framework, emotional complexity becomes inconvenient. Relationships are evaluated strategically. Public appearances become operational decisions rather than social ones. Even silence itself becomes institutional language, which may explain why Beatrice's refusal resonated so deeply within royal circles. Because for those who understand how the modern monarchy truly functions, the decision represented far more than personal scheduling. It reflected an institution increasingly defined by careful distance, invisible calculations, and the quiet management of risk. Because in the House of Windsor, even silence becomes part of the record. In the end, Princess Beatrice never publicly criticized anyone. She never issued a dramatic statement. She simply declined an invitation. Yet within the ancient machinery of monarchy, that quiet decision may have spoken louder than any confrontation ever could. Because that is how the House of Windsor has always communicated during moments of internal uncertainty. Not through shouting, not through emotional public spectacle, but through an carefully measured silence layered beneath centuries of ritual, symbolism, and restraint. Royal culture was never designed to explain itself openly. It survives by implying, by signaling, by allowing distance, timing, and absence to carry meanings too sensitive to ever be spoken aloud directly. And perhaps that is why this moment lingered so powerfully in the public imagination. On the surface, nothing truly happened. No explosive interview emerged. No leaked confrontation shattered headlines. No official feud was confirmed by Buckingham Palace. Yet millions became fascinated by what was missing rather than what was present. A declined invitation became a mirror reflecting the monarchy's deeper anxieties, its fear of instability, its obsession with image, and its relentless struggle to preserve continuity in an age where every silence is dissected in real time. For Princess Beatrice, the situation may ultimately represent something far larger than one uncomfortable social decision. According to royal commentators, her evolving position inside the monarchy reflects the difficult transformation facing an entire generation of royals raised in the shadow of scandal, institutional precedent, unsure, and public distrust. Unlike previous eras where royal identity alone guaranteed stability, today's monarchy demands something harsher: constant adaptation. And adaptation often requires sacrifice. Over the course of this controversy, one theme emerged repeatedly behind palace walls and media speculation: alike duty over personal comfort. It is a principle deeply woven into the crown's identity, one reinforced by Queen Elizabeth II throughout her reign and increasingly emphasized under Prince William's emerging influence. The monarchy may modernize its public image, but its emotional logic remains remarkably ancient. Personal feelings matter less than institutional preservation. Family loyalty matters less when weighed against the survival of the crown itself. That truth is both the monarchy's greatest strength and perhaps its greatest tragedy. Because behind every carefully managed appearance stands an individual forced to navigate impossible emotional contradictions. Beatrice did not choose the controversies surrounding her family. She did not create the fractures shaping the modern House of Windsor. Yet, like so many second-generation royals throughout history, she inherited the consequences anyway. And according to those familiar with palace dynamics, that burden quietly shapes almost every decision she now makes. The refusal itself became symbolic precisely because it was so restrained. In aristocratic institutions, absence carries extraordinary power. To appear beside someone is endorsement. To remain distant is caution. To decline quietly is often interpreted as calculation, survival, or silent alignment. The monarchy understands this better than anyone. That is why the palace increasingly favors controlled silence over emotional confrontation. Public conflict risks chaos. Silence preserves ambiguity. And ambiguity gives the institution room to survive. Because survival has always been the monarchy's true art form. Kings fall. Scandals erupt. Public opinion shifts violently across generations. Yet the institution endures because it adapts slowly, strategically, and often invisibly. Relationships change behind closed doors long before the public notices. Alliances cool gradually. Distances widen without announcement. And by the time outsiders recognize the shift, the monarchy has usually already moved forward emotionally, politically, and institutionally. Finale, perhaps that is what this story ultimately revealed. Not simply tension surrounding one invitation, but the cold emotional mathematics governing modern royal life. Every appearance matters. Every absence matters more. And somewhere inside that unforgiving system, individuals like Princess Beatrice are left balancing private loyalty against public survival with almost impossible precision. In the end, the crown remains what it has always been. Not merely a family, but an institution determined to outlive the discomfort of any single generation. That reality demands sacrifice from everyone inside its orbit, especially those positioned close enough to feel its power, yet distant enough to remain vulnerable to its silent judgments. And so the refusal remained what royal history so often preserves best, not a scandal shouted aloud, but a silence powerful enough to echo through palace corridors long after the ballroom lights had faded. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.